This is the story of a man who was the strongest hero of the world, but was betrayed by those near him. We begin with the sudden emergence of monsters into the world, bringing destruction to Earth. However, all of that ended when the 13 gods fought the demons. The strongest amongst all the gods was the 13th god, which made the 12 gods angry, causing them to trap and kill the 13th god in order to rule the world. This is the story of Lee Gun, the 13th god, strongest in the world, and his revenge against those that harmed him. Let's start the storyline, beginning on the last day of the 20th century. Earth's peace was destroyed with the arrival of disasters, a disaster more difficult than anything humans had ever faced so before. Humanity fell into great chaos due to the powerful creatures from an unknown civilization that appeared suddenly. The world was engulfed in panic as these creatures tried to feed on humans. Humanity called these creatures of unknown civilization disasters. The emergence of disasters could appear anywhere and any time around the world. Humans fought with modern weapons, and even nuclear weapons were not enough to defeat the disasters. In the end, the disasters continued to destroy the Earth without anyone being able to fight back. Hope existed once again because of the 12 gods of the zodiac, whom we call the divine gods. They gave the blessings to 12 selected awakened humans to receive power directly from the divine god. These 12 chosen people were called saints. However, unexpectedly, there was a 13th awakener who appeared without getting the blessing of any of the divine gods. Even so, he was included as part of the saints. They know him by the name Lee Gun. After the awakening of the 13 saints, humanity began to fight back. The 13 saints decided to join forces and planned to raid the place where the most terrible disaster that massacred humanity had gathered. That place is called the Demon Tower. The day before the raid to the Demon Tower, Lee Gun was seen having a meal with one of the saints from the Sagittarius zodiac named Hugo Otters. Hugo says, "Listen carefully, maybe tomorrow you will die. This disaster is very terrible." Lee Gun answered, "Why did you suddenly say that? It seems like you want me to die." "Okay, I know you're worried about me, but just so you know, the number of disasters I've killed is way more than the 12 of you. Do you think I'll die there? That's impossible." The next day, the 13 saints gathered to kill the Crimson Eye, who was the leader of the disasters. They gathered in front of the Demon Tower. Lee Gun, who possessed the most strength, stood at the forefront with eyes filled with conviction. He said, "Let's start the battle," so they started the raid. When the raid took place, the other saints could only be silent and were annoyed because they saw Lee Gun easily kill many disasters. Two of the saints said, "If we managed to kill Crimson Eye, we would get a big reward." "Hey Lee Gun, you must need a lot of money. Only with money can you restore your handsome face and injured body. Later, you also have to remember in the future, don't go straight to the scene when a disaster appears in the city. We need more victims first so that they reward us with abundant money." In his heart, Lee Gun said, "It sounded good calling them saints, but they are just selfish people." The saints were taken aback by a great power they felt and saw the figure of a disaster above them. They recognized him as the ruler of the tower, Crimson Eye, who was a giant-sized disaster with 3 eyes. Lee Gun couldn't believe that just by looking at it, he had already felt an intense pressure. When Crimson Eye roared, the pressure of its energy was so intense that the other saints started to panic. Suddenly, a crack shattered from the earth, as the Crimson Eye emitted a torrent of fire which penetrated the tower. The 12 saints felt fear and began to run away. Lee Gun looked at them and said, "You guys have no shame in calling yourselves divine saints." Lee Gun started to move, determined to be the one who would defeat Crimson Eye. He jumped and swung his sword right near Crimson Eye's head. Managing to defeat the Crimson Eye by himself but having to lose one of his arms in the process. Lee Gun was angry because the saints left him even though he was running out of stamina. Suddenly, a dagger stabbed into Lee Gun's body from behind, and he fell into the abyss. In the abyss, Lee Gun had survived the fall and trying to crawl and was greeted by a giant eye of a disaster. Despite having a missing left arm and not being able to move his right arm, Lee Gun crawled to the dagger that was stabbed into his body and stood up straight, holding a damaged sword and the dagger in his mouth without fear. Li Gun then continued to fight against the disasters that were there, and time flew by in his death. Countless disasters surrounded him, but Li Gun simply stared at them, shouting with all his might, "You think you have enough to kill me? I will escape and take my revenge against those that stabbed my back." 20 years later, a disaster stood in front of Li Gun and looked very scared. The disaster said it was impossible. How did he get to this place? Li Gun looked at him and said, "Looks like you are the last disaster," and killed him to get out of this place. Li Gun's appearance had changed a lot with an aged face but with strong muscles. After defeating the last disaster, suddenly, the place rumbled, and Li Gun fell, asking, "Is this the end of everything? Can I get out of here now?" In a city destroyed by disasters, two people were running, being chased by a group of disaster wolves. They knew it was over for them, as it had been predicted that Manhwa would encounter an incredibly strong monster that day. As they ran, one of them thought to themselves that if Li Gun had survived the Demon Tower, this type of disaster would not have been a problem. It turns out that they were in the same city where the Demon Tower was located. When all of a sudden, a bright light came out from the Demon Tower's door, causing a huge explosion to occur, leaving the two of them shocked. The Demon Tower was destroyed, and a human came out of the ruins. It was a man with a strong body, standing among the ruins. The man started to growl as he raged at the people around him. He accuses them of betraying him to the point that they dropped him into a trap and vowed to make them pay. He declared that all of them would die for what they had done. The man bravely fought and easily took down the wolves. He jumps high and lands near the two people trapped in the rubble. They wondered who the man in front of them was. Although the orange class disaster was known to trouble the upper awakened class, the man had managed to defeat it with ease. The two trapped people were panicked, questioning why the man had saved them. They couldn't believe that a human had saved them from the disaster. As they thought that the man in front of them had come from inside the tower, a gigantic disaster wolf suddenly appeared. The two humans were terrified and recognized it as the master of the wolf disaster from earlier. The disaster wolf gave off a powerful aura, and the wolf was enraged. It immediately spat out an attack from within its mouth, causing a big explosion. Surprisingly, the man was still standing after being touched by the disaster. With just one punch, he managed to beat the boss disaster. The man then looked at the two people behind him and asked them to buy him some food. He smiled. The two of them then took this man to a restaurant, but were soon shocked by the food bill spent by this man. They asked him who he was, and the man replied that he was just passing by. He asked why he could feel magic from one of them. The man looked shocked and felt uneasy. Upon looking in the mirror, he realized that his whole body had recovered, and that his left arm grew back to normal. To his surprise, he notices a snake symbol in his left hand, which suddenly glows and became a snake. Li Gun looked very panicked when he saw the screen that looked like a system. It contained a message about experiencing death and achieving the impossible. It also stated that his abilities would be transferred to a new body, and all achievements from the tower would be changed to experience. If he created a zodiac skill, all skills and unique trade zones would be transferred and evolved. Now he could use the power of offices, and he could see the power of the snake coming out of his body. Li Gun's cooking was slowly brought into the other dimension inside his body. He was floating in front of a snake, and he didn't understand what was happening. After being touched by the snake, he regained consciousness and fell. Li Gun asked if the two people saw a snake, but they replied that they did not see any snakes. They told him that he had just undressed and ran to the mirror before screaming. Li Gun wondered why other people couldn't see it. Suddenly, a message from the system appeared again, stating that he was now the owner of a Phaeacius. There were many messages from the system, and Li Gun was now the owner of the seat of the 13th god and many others. The current active skill was Super Regeneration, and the transferred skill was Saint's 13th Battle Good Instinct skills that could be used at the Crafting Eye of God Creation Workshop Class F. Super Regeneration allowed all injuries received by the body to be restored. The newly created body had a small penalty about the physical ability being decreased by 50%, and that its remaining cooldown time was 10 to 32 hours. Li Gun analyzed the situation and realized that the changes in his body was thanks to the skill of super regeneration. He had never heard of anything like this from the other saints. Besides that, he also couldn't feel the presence of the gods. Now that his body was recovering, it wasn't a bad thing. All he had to do now was to kill the saints that run away and had stabbed him. Li Gun became more excited. The collapse of the Demon Tower immediately shocked Korea and the world. Reporters and investigators gathered at the ruins, with two people standing there wondering if this was the work of a follower of Li Gun or a person who hates Li Gun. They were unsure. Besides that, the situation that occurred was a high-level event that even the saints found troubling. Now, we must confirm what really happened. Meanwhile, reporters kept looking for answers about the collapse of the Demon Tower, and were seen gathering at a press convention. One reporter asked Master Yang Wei to give his opinion on the matter. They asked if there was a chance that Li Gun was still alive. Master Yang Wei was one of the saints, who belonged to the Aries god, had no word on the matter. He then left the press conference and got into his car. He kept mumbling on about whether Li Gun was still alive. If that were true, it would be impossible because it has been 20 years since the incident happened. It was a miracle that the saints managed to get out of the Demon Tower, so how could he have survived? His body was damaged, but if you are still alive, then everything will be over. Yang Wei looked very annoyed. At an airport, a security team greeted a new arrival. It was Hugo Otters, one of the 12 saints. He had come to see the Prime Minister, who had requested a meeting. As he arrives, Hugo heard the news about the collapse of the Demon Tower. In his heart, he knew about how reporters always talked about conspiracy theories surrounding Li Gun, who disappeared 20 years ago. Unexpectedly, Hugo receives an unknown call, choosing to ignore it, still thinking about Li Gun. He remembered their past raid on the Demon Tower, where he had stayed behind to fight other disasters, and that the other saints fought alongside Li Gun. However, the other saints had left Li Gun behind, returning only with Crimson Eye's head. Since then, the whole world had proclaimed them as heroes. Hugo had searched for Li Gun many times, but to no avail. Finally, Jean-Louis of the Cancer Zodiac had told him not to waste his time looking for Li Gun, as it was useless, threatening Hugo that he could make it so there were only 11 saints left in the end. As he thought about this, Hugo receives a call from the Prime Minister about the collapse of the Demon Tower. The Prime Minister also mentions an unknown call from someone claiming to be Li Gun. Hugo was surprised to hear this and asked the driver to stop the car. He checked his phone and saw 30 missed calls from Li Gun. When he called back, Li Gun's voice answered, saying that he's gonna kill him for ignoring his calls. Hugo was shocked to hear Li Gun's voice and realized that he was still alive. Meanwhile, in Korea, Li Gun was still in the restaurant with the two people he had saved. He looked confused as they showed him a smartphone, calling it an interesting device. He thought about how the world had changed in the 20 years since he disappeared and realized that it had become a better place. They asked Li Gun, "So this is your first time using a smartphone? You can also see the news from here." Li Gun noticed that news about him was trending and read one of the news about his will. He remembers agreeing to distribute the treasure to orphanages and scholarship foundations, but he became angry the moment he saw the news said that the 12 saints who returned from the Demon Tower had changed his will. According to the new will, Li Gun had bequeathed all his wealth, including the divine relics, to the 12 saints to save humanity. Apart from Sagittarius, all of them received Li Gun's legacy. This news made Li Gun angry, and he decided to kill them all. Li Gun continues to talk to the two men, when he notices a message from his system, warning him that someone was watching him. Li Gun immediately came out of the restaurant and saw that it was Zodiac avatars, the direct subordinate of the divine god. A message from the system appeared again, saying that subordinate gods should create a barrier in the name of Aries, and the strength of the other divine gods decreased. Li Gun started to get angry. Suddenly, he fell silent after hearing someone calling his name. Since everyone was talking about him being dead and gone, Li Gun thought he was hallucinating. Two people were seen walking near him. Jamin recognized one of them as a Templar from Gemini. The two people came over to Li Gun, and Jamming panicked, telling Li Gun to come with him quickly, as he could get in trouble with that person. The man looked at Li Gun and said, "Look, what's all this? Get out of my way. Why are you silent? Are you really angry now? If you're angry, try to hit me." The two people then left Li Gun, while saying losers. It seemed like they were the people who idolized Li Gun. Li Gun looked annoyed, immediately turned around, and said, "Hey, street cockroach." The man then returned to Li Gun and said, "Try saying that one more time. You're just an ordinary person who can't even feel the greatness of someone's magic." Without saying much, Li Gun immediately flicked his forehead, causing his body to fly away. Jimin was shocked to see this while the woman then casts magic to attack Li Gun from behind. Once again, Li Gun flicked her away as well. They were both shocked that he defeated Templars with just a simple flick. This was hard to believe. Li Gun then approached the man's body and held a necklace, taking it. He said, "Isn't this a divine relic? Why do people like them have it? Only the saints should have something like this." Jimin then explains, "It seems you really don't know anything. Okay, I'll tell you everything. Humans almost became extinct several tens of years ago due to a disaster. But humanity managed to survive thanks to the divine gods and the chosen saints. However, because the whole world couldn't be protected with just 12 people, the saints gathered people to follow them and formed an organization called the Divine Cadres, with the Templars of each zodiac. The people who followed the saints then received blessings and were given power by the saints. The people who received the blessings are called disciples. The disciples were also ranked according to their strengths. At the top of the list is SSS rank, which is a saint who is directly chosen by the divine. Below the saints are SS rank, and they are called the 10 stars. 10 stars are considered to be strong candidates in becoming saints. Under 10 stars, the strongest disciple leads other disciples. Below the divine cadre captains were disciples arranged by rank from downwards. The power of the divine god comes from the disciples' beliefs. So, there is competition between each zodiac Templar to attract people into their respective divine cadre. The selected disciples will receive a gift from the divine god in the form of a divine relic. Li Gun upon hearing this and was amazed. So that's what has been happening while I was not around. It has been 20 years as the Aries avatars have gathered around him. The message from the system said that the underlings of Aries avatar of wealth and greed were enjoying their situation, waiting to see you finish off the man and woman. They expect to see blood spilled. It is said they will reward you provided he kills both. Jimin believed that it was not possible for Li Gun to get attracted by God's avatar. They were just like the shadow of the divine god. To disobey it was the same as fighting a divine god. Li Gun, it's better do it fast. Li Gun looked irritated. I wonder why Aries avatars were in this place. It seems nothing has changed for them. Li Gun stepped onto the earth and released an aura of power that instantly shattered the barrier of the Aries avatar. Li Gun laughed, even though I didn't scare anyone. The Aries avatar then ran away. Jimin looked surprised that the god avatar ran away like that. Li Gun is definitely not an ordinary person, he said. Li Gun asked Jimin if the bastard laying on the ground was from Gemini. Jimin replied, "Yes, you're right. The Gemini divine cadre is made up of influential people in this country." Li Gun smiled. Then they must have a lot of money. The clothes must be branded. Li Gun immediately took all his clothes, singing that looting is the best. In the evening, the three of them went to Jimin's residence. Jimin thanked him for saving them and even driving them home. Li Gun casually said, "Let's go inside. I'm sleepy now." Jimin, who wished for Li Gun to go home, was annoyed and asked, "Do you intend to stay at our place?" Nevertheless, Li Gun went straight in and shaved his head. As he looked around the house, Li Gun suddenly saw many disastrous mosquitoes flying around. He kills them one by one and notices many divine relics on display. This is unnatural, he thought. It's obvious that disasters will occur if you have something weird like that in your house. Jimin answered, Weird thing? I got this directly from Saint's Gemini. Saint's Gemini kissed it and gave it to me. Lee Gun ceremoniously broke it straight away and exclaimed, "It smells so disgusting." Jimin was annoyed that all the divine relics in the house were destroyed. Lee Gun said, "Those bastards haven't had enough of stealing all my money, but they really con people with weird stuff like this." Someone then entered the room, and Lee Gun asked, "Who are you?" The man looked angry and replied, "I am the owner of this house. My name is Sung Jae," releasing a blue energy around his body. Meanwhile, at the Divine Cadre Aries headquarters, Yang Wei was given a report. Young Wei was surprised by what he heard. Our household gods in Korea disappeared? Those avatars were the direct subordinates of the divine gods. No one would dare to drive them away. Quickly contact the other saints and find out if you have a clue. I also got another report, one of his subordinates said. Sagittarius saints, who had just arrived in England, suddenly flew out of England and headed for Korea. Yang Wei looked surprised, knowing that Hugo was Lee Gun's best friend. Could it be that the reason he moved there was because of the rumors about Lee Gun surviving? Did Lee Gun really come back alive? Do some deep research on this. He then asked, "What about the situation now?" His subordinate replied, "The place where the god avatar disappeared was found near a Gemini who was lying unconscious and not wearing anything. According to eyewitnesses, the Templar Gemini fought against a handsome man." Young Wei wondered, "Handsome man? Then it's not Lee Gun." No matter how bad this situation is, the possibility of Lee Gun coming back alive does exist. He continued, "For some reason, the god avatar in Korea disappeared, and lastly, we failed to kill the Spider Queen. If this continues, my position and reputation might be threatened. Now, prepare a private plane. We're going to Korea. I'll have to check for myself what exactly is going on." Meanwhile, at the Gemini Power Hospital, the man who was beaten by Lee Gun was seen lying in the hospital. The old man who was his grandfather shouts at the back of the room, "Who did this?" The man replied, "Don't worry about this, Chairman. This is the reason the Divine Cadre ordered me to move." The man was an S rank from the Gemini Templar with the nickname Permafrost named Min Sung Hoon.